Welcome to Cow Talks. I'm Chris Pravat, Beef Cattle and Forage Commodity Director for the Alabama Farmers Federation.
And I am Marcelo Valau, Forage Extension Specialist with the University of Florida.
And this is our podcast, where we dive deep into the main topics affecting livestock and forage production in the southeastern United States.
From the mainstream media to new technologies straight from our research stations.
From cattle prices to international trade.
From our pastures and beyond.
Join us on this journey as we tackle the main issues affecting our producers and the sustainability of our production systems.
Today our special guest is Dr. João Vendramini, my colleague here at the University of Florida. Dr. Vendramini is a professor and forage specialist at the Range Cattle Research and Education Center in Ona, Florida. For those that don't know where that is, it's in the southern part of the state. So the biggest thing about South Florida is that we normally think about the coast and all the tourism and beaches, but actually is a big agricultural country and big cattle country in the center part of the state. So Dr. Vendramini is here today to talk about the forages and forage systems in South Florida. João, welcome to the Cow Talks podcast. I appreciate you coming today.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
João, you've been at the Range Cattle Research and Education Center for 20 years?
Yeah, about 20 years.
So how has been the ride there in Ona?
Yeah, it has been a great career there for these last 20 years. I think one very positive thing about the research center here, it's a multidisciplinary group, but all focus on grazing lands. And here in South Florida, even in Florida in general, it's more focused towards beef cattle producers. But it can take grazing lands in general, like native lands, and we do research, a lot of ecosystem services, environmental sciences. But our main clients are the landowners that are beef cattle producers in Florida.
Sounds good. Yeah, it's a fantastic ecosystem. There is very interesting all the beef cattle production. Also, one of the beauties of the unit is that you basically have a functional cow-calf operation with all the other things in terms of wildlife and native forages and also implemented pasture. One of the things I would like to talk today to you, João, is about that environment in South Florida. It's very different from the rest of the state and very, very different from the rest of the coastal plains. We still have some of the same species, but there's a lot more, especially on the native level. But let's talk about the grazing systems in general there, characterize them a little bit.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's what probably I would consider a simple system. And most of the limitation comes while we go in the southeastern states, that the main limitation will be climate, right, or temperatures, because it has hard freezes, and that will limit the type of forage that will grow through the year and give you opportunities as well. But here in South Florida, that is not the main limitation, because we can go years with no freezing events, right? But we do have a very challenging soil and mainly hydraulic system. And on the soil standpoint, we have although we have some portions that are the organic soils around Belgrade, but most of the pasture land are in spodosols that are 98% sand. So fertility-wise, it's really poor, and the soil are not able to hold a lot of cations, and what the organic matter mineralize really fast because of the sand and temperature. With that, so we have a weak soil to grow whatever we decide to do. And on the other side, we also have a very shallow water table. It goes from 6 feet sometimes during the year to the surface, and it can be at the surface in a lot of regions for like a month or two. So we call those poorly drained soils that are quite common here. A lot of the land that are in pasture land is characterized by those situations. So you need to have something that will thrive and survive on those environments. That's why I think we have these forage choices that we have. We have very little annual forages, but we have these perennial forages, and most that you're going to find are Bahia grass and limpo grass.
So those would be the main implemented forages, right? That people are working with Bahia grass and Limpo grass, but also you have a range of native forages that are still being used there, right?
Yes, that's correct. We still have a pretty good amount of rangeland or native rangeland, land that was never cultivated. And the main vegetation on those are palmettos, but also we'll have some of the native forage. So we have Indian grass, we have blue stem, creeping blue stem, chocolate blue stem, we have blue cane, we have few. And those rangelands, the amount of forage is extremely variable. And I think the main factor is how the palmetto is established and aggressive on those landscapes, and that will dictate the amount of forage that you have. We have some management practices that we use on those rangelands, such as fire and chopping, to try to suppress the palmetto and have a little advantage on the forage, to let the forage to grow a little. I wouldn't be able to quantify what is the proportion of the herd that really rely on rangeland, but we know we still have a lot of rangelands, and producers use them mainly during the winter here. They stockpile the rangeland and turn in like dry cows on the rangeland, so they can wait for a little better price around March and sell the open cows at that time.
So just back into the range. So we have some of those forages, but they are lower quality. They're well adapted to the region, but they end up being lower quality and lower in carrying capacity. What are we talking about in terms of carrying capacity in the rangelands in South Florida?
Um, I think you'll be also dependent on those palmetto populations that we have, like I mentioned, that can be quite variable even in the same area. And we will go from between, I would say on average, you'll be like 20 acres for a cow,
Hmm.
but it can vary between 10 and 30. It
Sure.
depends on the type of and the management. So a lot of the producers manage the rangeland quite well, mainly with fire. So like 5 year period, they burn it, or the old saying here, they burn whenever they can burn, right?
Hmm.
Whenever they have the conditions, and sometimes they cannot burn because there is a burning ban. At the time that they can burn, that's not too wet. There is a burning ban, and then you get in the summer, you cannot burn anymore because it's too wet. So they try to burn. I would say if you do it like every 3 5 years, I think you have a better system that will have more forage, and they can graze it better and increase a little stocking rates.
We seldom see any other type of improvement in those rangelands, such as fertilization or liming or anything. It
No,
doesn't pay off.
no, yeah. That it goes probably against the philosophy of having the rangeland, mainly because you wanted to keep a natural environment for different reasons, right? There are a lot of people that are interested in the real estate value. They just have the land there, and it's an investment. A lot of people that are interested most in hunting, right? The hunting leases for on those lands are probably not now because we are having pretty good cattle prices, but historically you can get a pretty good amount of money from hunting leases, or even for hunting for their own family, right? So with that in mind, I think they try to disturb as little as they can, and cattle becomes secondary. They
Sure.
still use it, but it's not the main goal.
And this is a very interesting thing because both the rangelands and just a regular beef cattle production in implemented pastures, they play a major role in environmental conservation in the southern part of the state, right? You were talking before about the shallow soil, the high water table, and poorly drained soil. So basically, that whole hydrological system there is connected, and the rangelands make a big part of the preservation of that water quality and a lot more. So I think there is a lot of misconception that a large part of the pollution comes from beef cattle production there, and actually, it's a large part of the solution is those rangelands and pasture lands.
Yes, we used to have a center director here at ONA. He mentioned that about 40 years ago, Florida had a population of 5 million people and a million cows. And now we have 20 something million people and a million cows. but in 40 years we had no environmental problems. And then in these 40 years afterwards, we have now environmental problems, and they blame the 1 million cows, right? They were during the whole time, and that and there is no way to relate that to the cow, because if you can think about all those grazing systems, even the ones that are cultivated, they are extremely low input grazing systems. They use rarely fertilizer, very little herbicide. They have this warm season perennial grass that grows and accumulate a lot of carbon, and uptake all the nutrients because, like I said, we don't fertilize mainly because we can afford, not because we don't want to. But then you have this grass that is very aggressive in uptaking the nutrients and recycling through the cow. And I mean, this is a perfect system for environmental and conservation, right? And it's very difficult. And all the research, we have a vast amount of research, I think, that prove and have evidence that's the case. But still, most of the population is urban recently, and they get a lot of information from the internet. May not be scientific information, maybe just thoughts and perception. And I think our goal is probably try to provide scientific information to try to change those myths.
Yeah, perfect. And that's why extension is here, is to help us clarifying some of those questions with scientific and unbiased information. I appreciate you mentioning that. So we talked a little bit about this, the natural system, the native grassland system, which is somewhat limited in terms of productivity, but has other major benefits in the region in terms of ecosystem services and wildlife. You mentioned, just so we recap, and especially in terms of how it fits into the improved pasture. So whenever we're managing the rangelands, cattle in the rangelands, what's the normal cycle for the beef cattle production when it's calving?
Yeah, the beauty of the beef cattle production systems is a lot of people do what is best for them or what they feel it's better for them. So because of that, there is a lot of variability, right? It's not like growing chickens in a chicken house. It's a lot of variation. But historically, and based on a lot of research that Dr. Rob Kalmbacher did here at ONA many years ago, it makes sense to use those rangelands like after the fall. We let it grow a little during the summer, and then we start using those rangelands in the fall and winter. It depends on the amount of forage that we have. It's almost a stockpiling system, right? And during that time, for sure, you need to supplement the cattle because the nutritive value of the forage will be limited. But we can have quantity if you manage okay and you have a good feel for the range that you have. So then you can adjust the stocking rates. I am saying that a lot of people use the animals with the least nutritional requirement to graze those lands, like a mature open cow, but they still have people that use other different categories there, and they supplement more, for example, or they provide some other things. It will be conditional, but I think grazing fall and winter, this stockpiled range and providing some supplement for mature cows is probably the most common management practice that we use.
So then we go to the next step in terms of intensity of productive of production in that region, which would include implemented pastures like Bahia grass and Limpo grass. You didn't mention Bermuda grass much, and I believe there is a reason for that too. So how those implemented pastures figure in the production system in South Florida?
Yeah, I think the general saying is people used to keep 80% of Bahia grass if they have a land that is not dominated by poorly drained soils. I think 80% Bahia grass, 20% of Limpo grass, it's a pretty common setup that we see where people use the Limpo grass as the winter forage, right? They graze Limpo grass in the winter and they graze the Bahia grass in the summer. We have, for example, stargrass. We still have a lot around Okeechobee, still people that have a lot of stargrass, although we haven't seen interest and expansion on stargrass, but we still have a lot of land that has stargrass. Stargrass is preferred over Bermuda grass here, mainly because we don't have a really cold weather. And second, because stargrass can survive in some of the poorly drained soils. if it's not too aggressive, if the water doesn't stand for there too long. So stargrass can take up a little more water, while a lot of the Bermuda grasses, they are very sensitive to those poorly drained soils. So with that, for example, they have the explosion of TIF-95 in 1994, 95. So we probably start planting TIF-95 in different regions. And TIF-95 has one of the parents is a stargrass, right? It's not a true Bermuda grass, but it's a Bermuda star. But we learned later that TIF-95 is very sensitive to poorly drained soils. So with that, a lot of people in South Florida plant the TIF-95, but after 2 or 3 years, it was gone. And that happens with a lot of the Bermuda grasses here. That's why we don't have the land with as much Bermuda as you're gonna see in North Florida, South Georgia, Auburn, Alabama in general.
But on the other hand, you have the limpo grass, which it makes a very it's a very important forage for your systems there. When we talked to Dubé in another episode, he talked about limpo grass as fall grazing, stockpiled. You have that option to stockpile it, but also limpo grass if grows throughout the winter there, right?
Yes, we had some grazing trials. We found out that it may be 30% of the herbage accumulation during the year, but it's a grass that some other warm season perennials, they have the same characteristics. But what happened, limpo grass doesn't really get dormant like the Bahia grass and the Bermuda grass. If you have a cold spell, you stop. But then a little warm up that happens to us. And if you have moisture, and this grass is a lot of times in places that have moisture, right? Because they were poorly drained anyway. So you see it start greening up really quick. So that's why it has a little better accumulation in the winter. And even if it doesn't, you can use as a stockpiled forage because it keeps the digestibility a little better than the other warm season grasses.
Fantastic. So we talked about several of the most common forages, but you also work with some less common forages throughout your career. There, you've tested a lot of stuff. What have you found that were the interest or that are working well, depending on different systems there on
Mhm.
alternative forages for South Florida?
Yeah, I think one major constraint that we have is the fact that most of the productive forests that we have, other than Bahia grass, where Bahia grass should be the standard because it has been here for a while, but they are planted with vegetative material. And that creates a big barrier for people to adopt because it's difficult to plant. It's difficult, the whole process is difficult, right? If you have been through, you know that is challenging. With that, I start focusing on some that are propagated by seed, right? Some of these warm season perennial grass that are perennial here in South Florida, but they are propagated by seed. And we found over the years few that are quite good and adapted to South Florida in different conditions. And we have some material out, so we publish them and we promote to produce some of this work to try to identify these alternative forages is funded by the Florida Cattle Enhancement Board. So that is a sign that beef cattle producers are really interested in those options. Such an example, currently we are testing like a collection of germoplasm, like 7 different materials, just in poorly drained soils. So we want to try to see if some of this, and we try panicum and brachiaria, and now we have pretty much brachiaria in this grazing trial. So we want to see if you can identify one that can be adapted to these poorly drained soils as much as limpo grass. Limpo grass is our standard, so we have limpo grass in the trial, and then we have these other forages that we are grazing and trying to identify one or two that will be superior under those conditions.
So, if you were putting together an ideal forage system for you, in let's just pick Onam to restrict a little bit, how would you organize that forage budget, those different forages and that forage budget around the year?
Yeah, I think as a perception, as a forage specialist, it's quite different from probably a perception from a producer, right? With different goals, and I think we have to acknowledge that a lot of these producers they make a living working, so it needs to be a easy, simple system that will fit their goals and make that profitable, right? And I understand with that in mind that you need to be really simple, because otherwise you don't have time to do other things in life, and it becomes quite difficult. But what I think is we have this system in place that is Bahia grass, limpo grass. So we have a very good example, like in 2014 we released the new limpo grasses. That has been, according to beef cattle producer in South Florida, that has been the best work from the University of Florida for them ever. So they consider that the landmark for work provided by the University of Florida to producers in South Florida. So that is a sign how important this is. So I think we have Bahia grass and limpo grass, and we have that a lot of room also to work on Bahia grass, right? And to have a new cultivar, mainly a tetraploid, one that will be comparable to Argentine with some benefits. And we have something in place. We have the effort going on. So I think that will be the backbone of the whole thing. But we have seen over time mainly pressure from diseases and insects, primarily chinch bugs, spittle bugs. So with that in mind, it makes me to believe that you always need to have something on the side that will not be affecting your income or anything, just for you to find out if you like it or not, if it fits or not, right? And there may be those other, it may be a stargrass, it may be a Bermuda grass, it may be a brachiaria, it may be a panicum, or whatever you decide to do. But I think it's very important, because the land is so specific, and the management as well, to have something on the side that you test over time. And if you like, you can spend, like you can expand and increase your area and start grazing by cattle. And with that, you gonna be for sure more resilient, because if you have a problem with a disease, that will take all your Argentine Bahia grass. So we still have some other forage species that can carry you through the to the
So we basically we need to fit our system to our needs or adapt our needs to what we can grow. But the bottom line is add diversity. When you have diversity, you have more options throughout the year. And then when we overlay the beef cattle component, and I know you mentioned really depends on the producer's objective, but if there is either an ideal or what are more common system there in terms of time of calving and management, what would that be to merge
yeah.
that forage and the animal needs?
Yeah, I think we have seen the benefits of having like a fall season, calving season. So, although that is not for everybody, but we have seen the benefit on weight of the calves, weaning weights, and health of the calves, so on and so forth. And with that if you think about everywhere else, you do the breeding season where the forages start growing. Here we do the opposite, right? Mainly because our summer is too wet, and we know by May or June it start getting too wet, and those calves don't gain more weight, right? Because of environmental conditions, and you need to be gone because it may come a hurricane and you cannot be able to win those calves and send the trucks up north. So there are a lot of things involved. So that fall breeding season, it seems to be quite important. And on that limpo grass production system, we create a system that if you have 1 acre of stockpiled limpo grass with some protein supplement, you can carry a mature cow and a calf for 3 months. So that is a very simple. That's why I think it's the whole value of the limpo grass there. So you create a system like that. You know the years will be different. If you have a very dry fall, you cannot stockpile much, and you need to have a backup plan. But on that system, it's very easy. The cows get out of Bahia grass, and then they get on stockpiled limpo grass, and they go through the breeding season. By the time that they finish the breeding season, the Bahia grass will still be short, but those cows will be bred or not, right? I think that is the main bet. We wanted to keep them with body condition score 5 during the whole year, but we know we're going to have some shortfalls of forage, and that will come in March. For us, March, April, we get dry, and Bahia grass is growing according to the moisture, because now we have a long days and Bahia grass may start coming up, but you will still be dependent. And you can keep your supplementation program, you can stretch with something else, or sometimes the cows lose some body condition there, but we know that by April, May, the grass will be back, and then you start grazing again and recovering body condition to the time that they will win in July again. And also, we are talking about grazing the bahia grass and the limpo grass in the fall, but we have to remember that you can graze the limpo grass anytime, right? You still have the area to graze it during the system. One thing that I tell producers that spring is the most critical thing regarding forage persistence, right? So you don't want it to be overgrazing the Hermatra in the spring because it's the time where the forage is taking all the reserves from the roots and send up. And if you keep grazing and hammering, so that limpo grass is the first one that will die, and you're gonna have something else other than limpo grass there. So I think it's important to keep the limpo grass in the spring to give some time for the limpo grass to recover before you start grazing again. But we know that sometimes it's not possible. So you don't have enough pasture, and you have to graze whatever you have. So,
Can you compensate some of that with fertility? Increasing the fertility so you can get it going faster?
yes, yeah, absolutely. I think that's an important portion. Here we fertilize really early, like March 1st is the time that we fertilize the forage. When we still be winter in many other places there, so we are fertilizing in March. Many times you can think it's still too early, right? Because the grass will not be growing so aggressively. However, I think it's a good plan because when you plan for March 1st, something will happen and you become March 15 or March 20, right? You will be delayed for some reason. The fertilizer guy will not show up, blah blah blah. So March 1st is a great idea. And then you fertilize your forage, you may not be uptaking all that nitrogen at once. But once you have some rain in that time, right? If you get some showers in March, that forage you will go ahead and you have great nutritive value and you have the growth. For that period where usually we struggle, like that we talk about April and May, I think that is a very important thing. So fertility, I think, play a very important role there in trying to get that forage out of the ground earlier so you can use it. And it doesn't work all the time. Like last year was a horrible year, like very dry spring. But sometimes when you are lucky and get a wet spring, so it's a great year.
You mentioned challenges with annual forages. You said that most of what we use there is perennial forage, but you also played with a little bit of annual forages, and it's a question that we frequently get from producers. Normally in the winter, can I put some cool season forages there? But sometimes in the summer, what has been your experience with the annual forages, both winter and summer in South Florida?
Yeah, I have been planting annual ryegrass here for 20 years. I plant every year. So regardless of the conditions, but like I tell, this is an experiment station. So if it dies here, it's a data that we collect and tell people it died, right? So, but I think for the producer standpoint, it is risky. It is risky mainly because you get a good stand if you have a prepared seed bed, right? For the winter, for annual ryegrass or something else like related to. So because the fall is still warm, if you oversee that warm season forward, you'll be growing and competing. So sometimes you get nothing on the cool season because it doesn't get cold. So you have star grass, you have bahia grass growing, and the annual ryegrass never come up. If you plant on prepared seed bed, you have a much better chance, right? To have a better stand, and we have published that, so it's a huge difference. It's like 2,000 pounds compared to 200. So it's the chance that something will come up when you have a prepared seed bed. But I think going back to the option that we have, right, to have a little option, and I think it should be one tool that you have on the toolbox. And I think if you have the chance to plant at least a little annual ryegrass, everybody should. Again, it shouldn't be part of your whole budget and economical return because that we know that will fail half of the time or even more. But if it doesn't, we use the annual ryegrass here as a supplement, right? Not as a forage. So we use for the early weaned calves that we have it most of the times that they have a really high requirement, but you can use for heifers graze it like part-time if you have the capability. So we have producers here in Hardy County that do that. They plant on irrigated land and they graze it 3 times a week, and that's a great combination. So they don't need to do any molasses or any cubes. So they use the ryegrass as a supplement. But it's not for everybody. You need the equipment, you need the resources, and it's risky. So I think you should budget all of that before making a decision to plant a winter forage. And one portion of the winter forage here that I think everybody should use is when you are replanting a pasture. So that the winter forage needs to come in the program, because most of the pasture that we are replanting is because we had it took over by smutch grass or broom sedge, right? It took over and we have nothing left, so we need to redo the pasture. So in that situation, is much better to start preparing the fall and plant an annual forage, and then go with nothing and disking in the spring until the next summer, so you may have a better chance that that's much grass and broom sedge will not come back and choke your new pasture. So I think for that condition, the annual forage is great.
That is perfect. And for those that have interest in learning more about pasture establishment, we have a Cow Bites podcast here in the same channel that talks more about the different types of establishment and go over some of those things. Basically, we're trying to eliminate that weed competition, get the cleanest pasture we can, and then start over. What about the summer side?
Yeah, the summer is a little more sensitive, mainly because we go from dry to flooded, and we have very little options on the annual side for these annual forages. Like we, most of the times is sorghum Sudan or millet, and we have several instances here. You learn why people don't do it, right? And we have several instances where we plant the millet and then it was beautiful and then the whole thing flooded and go yellow and die, right? So then we get 30 days of grazing out of it when it's a big investment. I think on the when you do a pasture renovation, it makes sense. Like if you want to come in the early spring and risk it to have some millet on the ground, you know that you're going to graze for 2 months, right?
Hmm.
Because then in 2 or 3 months you're going to plant a new pasture. But in that situation, it may make more sense. But in order to have like a bare land and plant millet or sorghum or anything, or cowpea or sun hemp or whatever, to do every year just for the forage purpose, it doesn't make sense. It's been proven that it's is a difficult situation. One other opportunity for the summer annuals is on establishment again. Some people, they can take more risk. They like to see the bahia grass early in the season, right? And they sometimes they seed it in March. And we know the bahia grass will take a long time to germinate and cover the ground, so they add some millet to the bahia grass, and then many times they can have something to graze in about 6 weeks. So I think that is another good opportunity for the annuals.
Interesting. I often get some questions in South Florida for small ruminants. It's always challenging to answer that because a lot of the forages that are high in nutrient density are those annual forages or the legumes, and they'll have a hard time. I don't know if you're doing any work with small ruminants there or have done, and what is the normal recommendation for people that are with a goat or sheep in that region?
Yeah, we don't have one, to be honest, because a lot of the sheep and goat production is informal. So the people that have those small ruminants, they never really seek information, right? To they have their own thing and it's very informal. They sell on the backyard, and we don't have, like, if you ask me who is the small ruminant producer in South Florida, I will not be able to list you
Hmm.
one. But we know that they are browsers, right? I think for people that have those, we tell them try to have some of these legumes, and we have a variety of pigeon pea and cowpea and even achinominy. And many times these small ruminant producers, they have a little land and they have no tractor, no management.
Yeah, so management gets to be.
Yeah, so
And
then you tell them to overseed something, they are open, right? They open their eyes and say, "Oh my God, I have never heard that, but I don't have a tractor now."
yeah,
With that, it becomes a little more challenging.
interesting. Talking a little bit about the legumes that are used for South Florida. I'm very keen on. In Florida, we always talk about perennial peanut. It's somewhat limited. because of the flooding conditions. But we have ashnomini that is a great option also in a mixture with limpo grass. How do you feel about those? Are there any options for people that want to introduce legumes in pastures in South Florida?
Yeah, for sure, Ashinomini is the best one that we have and the most popular, the one that we have the most. If you manage well, will be a great addition to the pasture. It's not easy to keep it alive, mainly for weather conditions and management. So you need to let it recede when you need the most of your pasture in the fall that you are
Yeah.
short. So then people are not able to do that. And we also have Carpon desmodium that is quite good. It's perennial, but it doesn't perenniate here. I think most of the times because of management as well. But Carpon desmodium I think, is a great warm season legume species for us because of the harvest of the seed. I think we lost the companies that were interested in harvesting seed. And also we don't have large areas like we have at Shinome. The combines got bigger and you need to have, I don't know, more than 30 acres for someone to come. And many times those carpon are in a little tiny area and they have woods and they have stuff that the combine cannot run. So anyway, to try to address those problems with carpon, we sent some to Thailand a few years ago, where they do have a established seed production system after rice. So we send some of the carbon that we have here in South Florida, we collect in different ranches, and we send to Thailand, and we are trying to see if they will be able to multiply the seed and have a reliable seed production that we can buy from them here in South Florida and plant our pastures with carbon. So I think that has been a goal. So I am going there this October to take a look at how the project is going. But I think that's one of my hopes, that we'll be able to overcome the problems in seed production by doing some other places where they know what they're doing and they are focused on just on seed production. They don't graze it, they don't have animals, and then try to overcome. And the last one that I would like to talk is the pintoi, right? Is also a perennial peanut but produce seed. And we have proof here. We have the area here that has been I planted like 10 years ago, and every year increase in a place that is poorly drained. So it gets really wet, and the pintoi is still there. Uh, if you ask me, is it productive? No, it's not. The forage accumulation is very low, but it keeps fixing nitrogen and keeps blending with the forage. So I think for this production systems where it's really low input, so you not fertilize, you not do anything, you just mow the weeds. I think that pintoi may be a great addition because it's a better nutritive value, but it doesn't produce much, but we still be there contributing with the whole nutrient budget.
Fantastic. So quite unique environment in South Florida. Lots of opportunities, but I like the mindset. Keep it simple, and it can be productive. It's beautiful to see for those that have never been in the southern part of the state, in the inner peninsula part. It's big cattle country there. It's very nice to see. Dr. Vendramini, anything else we forgot to talk about today?
Think we covered pretty much the overall. And like I said, it's very dangerous to be talking about models in a beef cattle production system
Yes,
because it's very unique, right? You can go to the neighbor that do something completely different from what we do here at ONA. And it's not right or wrong, it's just different because of their goals and their conditions. But I think we talk about like general production systems that we see quite often here in South Florida. And like you said, 80% of the cow herd in Florida is around here, is around Okeechobee, Highlands County, Polk County. So it's a large cattle population, and I think it's quite interesting because it's different from anywhere else that you may go in the world. You go to South Florida, you'll be unique.
it's very unique. One thing we forgot talking about that I wrote here before, your latest release, Ms. Levy.
Yeah, the Miss Levy Bermuda grass, like we talked about the Bermuda grass before, like it's not the most popular forage here, but the Miss Levy is Dr. Miss Levy. He brought some material from Georgia, from the germplasm collection, and he had a trial with lights. to extend the day length, right, for Bahia grass. And close to that trial, he had the Bermuda grasses close. And he found out that this, at the time, he used to call the Bermuda 2000 because it was the year that he brought it in. He felt that that Bermuda grass 2000 was not very sensitive to day length. So he was the first one to start growing in the spring and also in the fall. And on that trial with extend day lengths, you could see that it was growing year long, so close to the trial. So he felt there was a pretty interesting material and also took some water, right? It was not as sensitive to water standing as the other Bermuda grass. So it took me a while to get to that one. I have my own interest, but after a while, I had a nursery here, and we started doing real work, and we felt that that trend about the early spring growth was pretty consistent across the state. So we have trials in Mariana, Gainesville, here in South Florida, and we saw that the Miss Level, it didn't have a greater forage production overall, but it have more forage production at the time that you need forage in early spring and late fall. So then we decided it had merit to be called a cultivar, and we decide to release. And I think we have received a lot of good feedback because a lot of the producers that use the Miss Levy, they also produce hay, and because it has thin stems, it can give you an advantage there, less drying period. It becomes, it keeps the color because you dry for less time on the field. So it produces a beautiful hay. I think the hay, mainly square base for horses, that a lot of people, they like it, what they see on the Miss Levy. So I think it has merit, and it's something that we grew and developed here in South Florida. So I think we are quite proud of it.
Yeah, it is a very good forage. And each actually here, even in Gainesville in our nurseries, it is one of the first ones to come and the last ones to still be green.
Mhm.
So has a lot of advantage for those interested in both limper grass and some of the Bermuda grass. University of Florida provides at low cost some material for you producers to start nurseries, and those materials are available at 3 sites: at the Beef Research Unit in Gainesville, at the Range Cattle Research and Education Unit in Ona, and also at the North Florida Research and Education Center in Mariana, with Dr. Dubé, Dr. Vendramini, and I handling those projects. Also supported by the Florida Cattle Enhancement Board through the Cattlemen Association. So appreciate the support on that. Dr. Vendramini, thanks a lot for joining the Cow Talks today. It's a pleasure talking to you, and I'm glad we're doing this before you move on to your next adventure in life at Texas A&M. I wish you a best of luck when you go there, and we'll always cheer your work here. You leave a big legacy, a lot of good information, and a lot of good impact in the beef cattle industry in South Florida and the rest of the state too.
Thank you, Marcelo. I was glad to participate in the talk and had a brilliant, rewarding, I would say, career here. And I think brilliant were my colleagues, people that I had the opportunity to work with. They make me look much better than I am. So I think, and also I think it's good for the records for all my friends that are the beef cattle producers in Florida that became my close friends. And I think that was for sure the highlight of my career here. The relationship with them, I think that could make my job, I think, meaningful and rewarding because I knew I was working with somebody. People are very professional, great people, and I think that also made my career really rewarding. Yeah, and thank you for the opportunity again.
That is fantastic. Thanks for your work here. Thanks for participating in the Cow Talks podcast. For our listeners, I hope to see you in our next episode of the Cow Talks podcast. Thank you. Cow Talk podcast was brought to you by the University of Florida Forage team with technical support from the University of Florida College of Agriculture and Life Sciences Faculty Instructional Resource and Support team. This episode was produced by Marcelo Valal, Olivia Maule, and Ashley Kanabrowski.